begin our presentation.
Great, thank you, Madison. So as you all probably know, today we are going to be talking about what's driving change and investment across innovation in retail tech. So far, it's been a record year, and we'll get into some of those numbers in a minute. And it's shaping up in Q2 to hit another record. And so we're going to be talking about a lot of different areas. If you have questions along the way, as Madison said, please put them in the Q&A box. Today, we're going to start by talking about the broad, high-level market drivers that are sort of pushing the market forward. Then we'll get into some of that data and some of the numbers on what things have looked like in Q1 and what they're shaping up to be in Q2. And then we'll dig into a couple of key sectors to see where we're seeing a lot of growth and opportunities. I will note that the full view of Q2 into what we call the state of retail tech, that is the report's name, will be published in just a few weeks. We'll wrap up the quarter next week and then get all that data together. We've been tracking the deals and the trends. So that'll be a publicly available report. So you'll be able to access that on our site. But you're getting kind of a sneak peek today on what we see already brewing and sort of what our projections are for the quarter. So before we get started, I want to note what we consider to be retail tech. And that includes these 6 main categories. These categories make up collections, what we call collections on our platform. And so clients are able to access these collections, which are essentially categories of companies, of vendors, of startups that provide these services and are specialized in these areas. And so you're able to go in and get a better view of where investment is headed, even within a category like in-store tech or within a category like on-demand. And I'll show a little bit of how I use those collections and how clients can use those collections in a little bit, but just kind of wanted to get ahead of any questions of what we include in our definition of retail tech. So let's get into sort of what the macro landscape looks like. Starting in, I think, this started in 2020, but has really spiked and continued its acceleration into 2021. It's a buzz. Omnichannel is, a buzzword that's been around for a long time, but is understandably part of many more discussions now among retailers and among consumer executives. With the growth of e-commerce and then the sort of simultaneous need to make stores more productive, more profitable, obviously there's a lot of need to connect the store and digital retail together. So this search, just as a quick note, is using the earnings call transcripts tool on our platform, which is a huge database of public companies' earnings calls. It tracks what they're saying, and you're able to search lots of different terms. When you are able to look at what public companies, what corporates are saying about different topics, it lets you kind of get, insight into where they're investing, into corporate strategy, what your expectations should be. And so it's very clear that omnichannel is going to be an ongoing focus to connect the store and online. And ideas like this from Target's CFO, where it points to the way that an omnichannel customer spends with Target versus other guests, says a lot, I think, and exemplifies why omnichannel is such a focus. So that's one major headline, and obviously it concerns the store. But as we think about the store, it certainly has looked different, the store shopping experience in the last year, and is going to continue to be, a hotspot for a lot of issues, including what's happening in the labor market. And that's something where the shortage of workers who want to be in a retail setting or a restaurant setting or many others has really intensified even in the last couple of weeks. So I want to show you how we use another one of the tools on our platform to get a feel for how this issue is playing more broadly. So what we use is something called, is looking at news mentions. And let me get back to that screen real quick. Okay, so now I'm searching in our platform, and we're looking up the term labor shortage and retail specifically. And you can see we can search across a lot of different areas on our platform, but specifically we're looking at news mentions. And I think unsurprising to anyone on this call, it's really spiked in the last few months. And when you look at those news mentions, we can see there are some think pieces that it brings up, but it does take us directly to a piece by that quotes the Best Buy CEO about why they're personally having trouble getting folks to work in the store. And so the labor shortage discussion in retail is real. And I think that, we'll see this in some other pieces from this month when we're looking at what the Chewy CEO said about rising demand, about labor shortages. We're seeing it impact how Amazon is going to approach, delivery and autonomous truck needs. And so, we're seeing that this is going to push up the need for automation. And that's going to be automation across the store and across retail operations. And, one of the major reasons related to that, of course, it's the need for employees and maybe a shortage of people who can do those jobs. But I do think that, it's important to keep in mind that the other thing automation does is it makes many tasks less costly. And it can drive profitability. And with the rise in e-commerce, important to remember that for many retailers, especially those omnichannel or multi-channel retailers, profits become a concern. And so they're looking for profits in a lot of different areas. And one of the areas that they've been looking for them, in addition to importing more automation throughout their operations, is notably in media. And so we're seeing so much discussion of these retailer media networks. And these are, of course, promises by all of these retailers here, and many that are not in, kind of whose logos are not shown here, who promise brands that they can offer a full omnichannel view of how shoppers are buying and interacting with their brands and with the retailer across channels, and give them tools to reach advertisers or to reach those customers via advertisements on their website, via in stores. It sounds a lot like maybe what Amazon does, and you can kind of thank Amazon for the drive towards these media networks. So these areas and areas like financial services are going to be big focuses as profit centers and revenue centers for retailers, in addition to driving their need for more customer data, their need to be able to translate all of that first-party customer data that they have into something valid for their advertising partners to use. So the other area I think that is interesting as we look back, especially in this quarter, at what the areas that we've been focused on. I think the other one in media, broadly speaking, is blockchain, and it is part of media as one piece of it, especially when we're looking at NFTs. But the blockchain also offers a lot of interesting enterprise opportunities. I think the main places that we see it rising in retail, you can see that news mentions around blockchain or NFT or crypto, as well as in retail, are up over the year. But the main areas are in supply chain and in transparency across the supply chain and authentication in the supply chain. And then on the crypto side, it's in loyalty and in payments. And then sort of in this media area, it's a lot to do with NFTs. And so when we look at these companies that got funding, just even in Q1, they're developing ways to sort of decentralize commerce. You can skip an intermediary like an Amazon. You're thinking about a brand and how you're going to sell. If you are working with some of these companies that make these open source e-commerce protocols. So blockchain is an area that I know a lot of our clients are interested in, our current clients. I think that it's really rising as an opportunity when you think about transparency and authentication. So it's something that we're going to be watching closely, like I said, both from a media perspective as well as from some of those more enterprise or operational perspectives. So these are all just really a slice of the trends that we've been watching, or the larger movements that we feel are driving investment and innovation in retail tech, really across the value chain. So if I had to boil it down to sort of these 5 areas for, I would say, the rest of 2021 and even looking ahead that I'm keeping a close eye on, certainly it's around omnichannel, and that has to do with store fulfillment. It has to do with customer service that's in omnichannel. Inventory tracking, you have to make sure the right products are on the shelf for e-commerce fulfillment as well as for in-store, for targeted marketing tech when it comes to a lot of those retail media programs. The second one is, of course, automation. And, I think there was a time we thought of automation that has to be a robot. And some of that is, if you think of autonomous delivery. But a lot happening around automated shelf monitoring, which I'll talk about more in a minute, around automating tagging products on your e-commerce site. The next is around, I'm calling kind of new media enablement. So that's thinking about the retail media networks. That's the creator economy. We have a new market map looking at that. That's thinking about personalization, virtual shopping as it comes to NFTs or other virtual goods. Last mile speed, which is seems like sort of maybe a narrow area, but we're seeing so much in even what we would call next hour delivery. And those are these the dark convenience stores that can promise to deliver within 15 to 30 minutes. So we're seeing a ton of funding and activity there that are really raising the bar across all fulfillment types for consumers. And then the final place is all marketplaces. And I'll talk a bit more about Amazon's marketplace and why that's driving so much investment in e-commerce. But we're also looking at B2B wholesale marketplaces, if you're familiar with Faire or Anchor Store, that provide an opportunity for smaller businesses to source in a more efficient way. We're talking about resale marketplaces. Recommerce secondhand has really taken off even in the last 6 months, and rental marketplaces as well. So these are the areas that I'm going to talk about a little piece of some of these today. But as you look across our content, whether it's the State of Retail Tech report that comes out in a few weeks, or a lot of the other content that we have on the platform, a lot of our other research, it's going to really be hitting on these 5 areas as it comes to retail tech. So let's get into what those investment trends do look like headed into the end, I guess the last 7 days of Q2. Now, this is a projection based on what we saw through May 31st in terms of data. Now, if you go on our platform right now, you'll see real data through June 23rd. And, I'll say that I think that we're on pace for we've had some really fast moving deals and some big deals in the last couple weeks. And so this projection, I think we could wind up with another record quarter. As it is that the projection based on about 2/3 of the quarter done takes us to nearly a record. It would have been a record if not for the Q1 record. And nearly $25 billion. And so, clearly outpaces the last 3 years or so, the quarterly rate. And, I think the big question is what's driving this? And I got a little bit to the trends part of what's driving it, or where companies are looking to invest, whether it's the investors or the retailers. But the more, I would say, nominal answer or dollars answer is that there's a lot of mega rounds. And so mega rounds are rounds of investment that are $100 million or more. And in Q1, there were 73 mega rounds. In Q2, we're on pace to hit 66. For comparison, in Q4 of 2020, there were only 33 mega rounds across retail tech. So this is an area where we're seeing investors really double down on what they feel are worthwhile areas of investment, and there's a lot of money going around. So you can see all of our major themes, though. These are the top 5 mega deals so far through our mega rounds so far through the first 2 months of the quarter. You see all of the trends that I mentioned represented here. We have fast delivery when you look at something like Swiggy. You have online grocery, which is Ding Dong Makai, which is the 3rd entry there. It's one of these group buying platforms. It's very popular in smaller cities and rural areas in China. It's actually about to go public, or it's filing to go public in the States. Automation in store, Trax got a really big investment in April, and they use computer vision to monitor shelf conditions. Marketplaces, Perch is one of those Amazon third-party brand acquirers that we'll talk about in a few minutes. It's one of the ones driving the marketplace trend. So we're really seeing everything come through here in terms of all of those trends that I mentioned before. And as I said, investors are really doubling down on what they think are sure bets. And it's clear that these ones are part of that calculation as we look at retail tech. So on that note, let's dig in a bit on the sector trends. And so among that retail tech landscape that I mentioned before, I'm going to focus specifically on in-store and e-commerce tech. These are, of course, foundational. Like I said, in the full report out in a couple of weeks, we'll have sort of a deep dive and a sampling highlights what's happened in all these other areas. But let's get into in-store retail tech to start and sort of see what funding is looking like going in Q2. And, the short answer is, as we go back into stores, investment in tech that makes the store more efficient, more productive, is accelerating. We're set to hit almost $3 billion in equity deals and funding for Q2. And I think the question, as I asked with the first overall aggregate number, is where is that funding going? And so a lot of it, as I mentioned, is going to make the store more efficient and more productive. And so on that note about the labor shortage, I think the discussion is one that can lead to discussions of, well, if we don't have enough people, we have to automate. But I do think that there are some clear threads in a lot of the discussions that I'm sure we're all seeing of the importance of these retailers investing in their associates and their people, and come in the form of wages. But these platforms that consolidate a lot of employee communications, task management, training, scheduling, all in one place, are another way of making the employee experience better. Not to mention, from the retailer perspective, perhaps make them more productive, make their stores more productive. And so there's several platforms in this area that have gotten funding even just in the last 6 months. Exonify is interesting. They work with Dollar General. They were acquired, but they do also they specialize in training programs. And so I think that that's going to be something we're going to see a lot. And then, one of the sure signs that this is a mainstream need is when a retailer like Walmart gets on board. And so just this month, they announced they're going to give almost 1 million employees a new Samsung smartphone. So instead of having to run the Me at Walmart associate app on their own phones, they're going to get a phone from Walmart specifically for that. So, I think that these apps that consolidate a lot of functions got a lot, and especially communication from headquarters, got a lot of attention during the pandemic, because there were a lot of those details that needed to be shared quickly and even more urgently than they would be in a normal store operations setting. But I think they're one of the examples of maybe a labor force tool that's going to stay in place after the pandemic. So keep a close eye on this area. There's a lot of different players that sort of do slightly different things. And so it'll be sort of interesting to see how they develop, and when more retailers get on board like Walmart did. And on that point about sort of automation and how that plays a role in the store, though, we are, of course, seeing a lot of that on this front. Shelf tracking tech is also going to be in focus. And there's a lot of different companies that do sort of different pieces of this. All of them here use some form of computer vision to focus on specific pieces of data that help retailers and consumer products manufacturers track what's happening at the shelf in an automated and sometimes even remote way. They don't have to rely on the anecdotal. One of the companies refers to the selfies that associates take of themselves and the shelf to show that they've executed the merchandising plan. Inventory management and merchandising tracking as a category within our in-store retail tech collection, makes up more than $1 billion of deals alone in 2021. And that's nearly double already the number of deals we saw in this area in 2020. So this is going to be a huge area. I think these all help to ensure on-shelf availability, merchandising execution, promotional effectiveness. This is a labor thing, but this is also an efficiency thing. And I think that, after learning their lessons last year around having the right products in the right place at the right time and how difficult that can be, these tools are going to be really important, particularly as stores become omnichannel hubs and they're used as fulfillment for e-commerce orders. You're going to have to make sure you know exactly what's on the shelf, and you want to make sure that you're engaging shoppers in the right way, and that's where the merchandising tracking is going to come in as well. And then the other area that we're seeing a lot of activity in when it comes to automation is, of course, checkout free or cashierless checkout, contactless checkout. Another term. We're seeing so much deployment of these services after sort of feeling like they were very theoretical or sort of ahead of the time for a while. And I think the key that we're seeing in terms of the solutions that are gaining traction with investors as well as with retailers are the ones that can be retrofitted to a retailer or bolted on or plugged into an existing store. That's why smart carts get attention. We have Kroger working with Caper. We have, of course, Amazon's Dash cart. We have Vive, which has its own cart. There's another company called Walk Out that just recently sort of came out of stealth, that you actually just attach a screen to an existing shopping cart. So it's not even that the whole cart is the smart cart. So you don't even need that infrastructure investment. Scan and go operations often function the same way. Super smart. This one pictured here just requires the building of these stations on the way out. So then the shopper's orders can be verified. Super smart bills itself actually as a loss prevention tool, because I think that's one of the fears a lot of the time with these cashierless solutions. So this is just one example. And I think I took a bigger look at all of these areas of task automation, of digitization in the store, and a market map published earlier this month, available to our clients on the platform. And so this is where we're looking at the landscape for what companies are out there, who the vendors are, who the top players are in areas like contactless self-checkout, like in areas like shelf management, but also in digital screens, robotic fulfillment, electronic shelf labels. I think it's really timely given a lot of retailers' concerns and suppliers' concerns right now. And so hopefully if you're a client, you'll be able to take a look at that and get a view of what the landscape is like when it comes to automation in the store. So to close out, we'll take a closer look at the sort of other piece of omnichannel, which is e-commerce and what funding is looking like in that area. And so, they're close to what they did in Q1, $11.5 billion, more than 250 deals. One of the areas that's driving so much growth in e-commerce funding is e-commerce enablement. So these are all of the tools and the software and the platforms that help e-commerce businesses run. It's been nearly half of all deals this year as we categorize them, more than $12 billion just in enablement alone. And a specific area that's gotten a lot of attention, I've mentioned a couple of times, are what we call the Amazon third-party brand acquirers. So they exclusively acquire small brands that sell on Amazon, and they help scale them. So they're approaching becoming sort of a new consumer brand conglomerate, and it's just an incredibly hot area with a ton of players. It's exploding, and you could argue it is maybe even toward a bubble of these. But how much funding, what are the actual dollars and cents, going towards this area? And so let me show you how I figure this out on our platform. So let me get back to that screen. So what I do is I go to our expert collections, which is where I track, of course, all of the e-commerce companies, but also these companies. I search for that e-commerce collection. I pull it up, and you'll see that within the e-commerce collection, we do have a lot of filters here. So if you are looking for, e-commerce players that sell a particular category or have, broadly speaking, a particular function. So this is where enablement comes in. And then if you, even within enablement, are they a payments company? Are they an analytics company? You can use those filters. But if you want to get even deeper on some of these 8,000 companies that are here in the e-commerce collection, you can use our expert tags. And so I've tagged all of these third-party players, which we're adding like one a day at this point, or third-party Amazon brand acquirers, as Amazon sellers. There's about 34, 35 of them in here. What you do when you're in the collection is then you go to the dossier. And this is a bunch of information about financing for these companies. And so it shows things like deal share by stage. You'll see that they're moving into later stage, actually, when you look at a lot of these 30-some companies. The size of the deals is not surprisingly on the rise, particularly when you look at average deal size. I do think it's really interesting to look at the geography. More than half of them are in the United States, but keep in mind that that means about half of them are international. And then the top funding companies in this area is notable. Thrasio wants to go public. Perch, we mentioned, just got one of the mega rounds. And then the thing that we really want to focus on, or that I want to zero in on here, is the funding activity in this area. And so this is the annual look, and we'll take a closer look at it from a quarterly point of view. We're almost at $1 billion in funding just for these companies in Q2. And we're calling them Amazon acquirers because so many of them specialize in companies in these small brands that sell on Amazon. But the thing that I'm finding more interesting is a lot of what's happening globally around with these similar acquirers that all bill themselves as being like Thrasio. But for marketplaces that are not just Amazon, for lots of other marketplaces. And so when you look at these are just the companies that have gotten funding in Q2. They all focus on different marketplaces beyond Amazon. So for instance, in India, so for Evenflow, they're focused, or Mensa, they're focused on selling on Amazon, but also brands that sell on Flipkart. For Opantia in Dubai, they're also focused on brands that sell on Noon. For Valereo in Latin America, they're also focused on brands that sell on Mercado Libre and Linio. So they all claim to have expertise to help these brands expand and scale on a lot of different marketplaces. The other one that I included here that is not strictly an Amazon brand acquirer, called MyAnalytics, is based in Mexico. It's actually a consulting company to a certain extent with ex-Thrasio employees. So this industry is now big enough in the last year and a half, essentially, to have had ex-employees starting in their own companies within the universe, that they help these brand acquirers find Amazon third-party brands to acquire. So an entire industry is now popping up around these companies that are sort of aspiring to be large brand conglomerates. You'll note, the other thing I want to know is that obviously we're seeing a lot of debt financing here, and they all say that they're going to use that to acquire their companies. So it's non-dilutive, so that's why we're seeing that round for all of these. But it also tells us how fast they're growing, I think. So that is just a very quick view into what we're watching heading into this last week of Q2. Like I said, a full report on this will be out in just a couple of weeks. But before we sign off for the day, I do want to see, if there are any questions that have come up to answer around, what we were able to share. I think that it looks like there is one on looking at, because I have mentioned loyalty programs here, what is happening in loyalty. Now, like I said, we'll have more on this, but I do know we've been watching personalization tech for loyalty. Sort of earnings transcript mentions around that have risen, and it's not strictly retail, but we've actually seen a lot of activity in loyalty programs around quick serve restaurants, which, as I said, it's not what we would actually put it under the banner of retail tech, but I find it really interesting. I believe like McDonald's either relaunched or launched a new loyalty program. Chipotle wants to launch a new one. I think Popeyes is launching a loyalty program. It shows how tough that the competition is for consumer dollars, just really across the spectrum as you're thinking about the consumer's wallet. This is not going to be just a retail discussion. So that's some of the areas that we're looking at in loyalty and rewards specifically. So let's see if we are looking at some of the other questions. Let's see. There's a question about technology to combat counterfeits. We're definitely seeing this in the world of AI, and I think it was last year. I think it was actually it was before the pandemic. Amazon really committed itself to combating counterfeits, whereas before it sort of took a hands-off approach. We do see a couple of other startups that are in this area. Really off the top of my head, I don't remember, but I do think it's going to be an increasing area of focus, particularly as we look and we see more cross-border commerce. and cross-border e-commerce specifically, and sort of getting that back, restarted, especially again after the pandemic. So I think that'll be definitely an area that to track. We do have a report coming out soon called AI in Retail, and I believe it will be a public report where we do address some of the uses to track counterfeits and to look for that transparency across the supply chain. One of the questions are, what are the trends in store locator platforms? And this is specifically talking about where to buy new products. I think when it comes to location technology as related to retail tech, the thing that we're seeing is actually the most activity in-store shopper location, and using that technology to think about what the layout should look like for the store. And I think we're going to see a lot more attention to these. One that comes to mind that just got funding this quarter is Butler, and BUTLR, and they track. It's essentially, it's like a heat map. They track where the activity is, and there are other companies that do similar things to see where shoppers spend their time, where is their most activity. And I think that this is going to become a really big consideration for retailers as they rethink what belongs in a store. This conversation was already happening before the pandemic, but now as more and more retailers have, e-commerce fulfillment that's inside the store, and have to think about what products they still keep on the shelf versus what belongs in that back room or in a fulfillment, maybe a micro fulfillment center. There's going to be a lot more serious consideration than there was, pre-March 2020. You see retailers like Best Buy is trying out. There's 4 stores it's piloting in Minneapolis, where it's trying to see if they could lop off half the store for fulfillment and just have the most popular items, in the front of the store. And so then that leads back to some of that technology I mentioned around shelf tracking, to know what are the products that need to be on the shelf. What are the ones that we need to have inventory of, and we're going to see a lot of interaction, I think, between some of these in-store technologies as it comes to the rethinking of the store. So let's see. Yeah, I think one of the other questions is around in-store experiences here. How retailers are trying to provide better experiences for navigation, for engagement, and it's interesting. For 9 months, or we'll say 15 months, actually, really, where we were trying to avoid being in stores. As people come back into stores, I think there's 2 ways that retailers and brands are using a lot of these engagement technologies. One, it's to simply get people into stores. So you're hearing a lot about, AR deployments, especially by luxury brands. I believe this Louis Vuitton or Burberry was doing a lot of augmented reality, and you get a character who represents you in the store, and you get to experience these new exclusive products. Nike has always been active in this area, and they used AR to make sort of a model of a Oregon State Park in one of their innovation stores that's in New York. And it was sort of a gamified experience where you got to go through the park, and then maybe you get a free gift at the end. And of course, it was promoting their outdoor line. So we're starting to see more of this. I mean, it seems like it's going to be, an augmented reality oriented experience. I think taking advantage of the mobile phones that shoppers have in their hands. We certainly see a lot of companies that are doing more when it comes to digital screens, but the value of those is going to be more on the end of collecting consumer data at the same time, making them interactive experiences, understanding dwell time, who wants what product in a sort of anonymized way. So I think that's there's going to be kind of lots of different parts of it. And I do explore that some in the tech market map that I mentioned before. So I think we have time for maybe 1 or 1.5 more questions. One right here is if there are any trends in build versus buy from retailers when it comes to tech development. I think that's a really interesting question, and it depends a lot, I think, on the part or the piece of the retail operations or the technology that we're thinking about. When it comes to fulfillment, we've seen a lot of buying, right? You want to have a proprietary fulfillment solution because you want to be in charge of that experience, because we've seen some of the drawbacks of partnering with outside firms. Now, I think retailers like Walmart are doing that to gain speed and learn quickly. Retailers like Target cite specifically that their acquisitions of companies like DLive and companies like Shipt have been major drivers in speeding up fulfillment, making it more efficient, making it possible for these stores as fulfillment centers. And then, of course, we know Amazon is bringing so much of its fulfillment in-house. And we see retailers like JD in China, their whole value proposition is that they are sort of their own massive fulfillment company. So I think that on the fulfillment side, we're seeing a lot more of buy or bring in-house in some way. Otherwise, I think there's going to be a lot of continued partnerships and business relationships. And that's something that you can search on our platform as well to assess startups. What kind of business relationships do they have? Who are they partnering with? And so then that's, I think, where in a lot of other areas, we might see, more ongoing experimentation. Walgreens, for instance, is partnering with Cooler Screens, which is one of those interactive screens that's literally on refrigerator doors to put their screens in 2,000 stores. The other side of fulfillment, we're seeing more partnership is micro fulfillment. These robotics companies remain independent at the moment. So I think that it's going to be piece by piece of the value chain, but I will say that on delivery, we're seeing a lot more maybe experimentation and then bring in-house for retailers. So unfortunately, we have a ton of questions, but we probably won't be able to answer all of them. I think we'll find a way to get to some of them, and you might be able to see a post on the site. But for now, thanks so much for attending. Hopefully you will be able to access the full report that comes out in a few weeks. And otherwise, I will hand it back over to Madison.
Great. Thank you so much, Laura. Thank you, everyone, for participating and sending in your questions. As Laura mentioned, we will be sending the slides and the recording within 24 hours. And again, if you're interested in doing a free trial of our platform that Laura kindly demoed, please click on this link. I'm just sending again in the chat. And yeah, I think that's all from me. Thank you so much and have a great day.